1 minute ago, British politics changed forever. The Supreme Court has delivered a verdict so devastating, so final, that it has shattered the very foundation of government. Prime Minister Keir Starmer has been ordered to resign immediately in what is being called the darkest constitutional crisis of our time. A country already divided is now staring into the abyss. This is not rumour, not speculation. This is written into the judgment of Britain's highest court. And the fallout is unlike anything the nation has seen before. The fall of Keir Starmer has unfolded with breathtaking speed, leaving both his allies and his enemies stunned. Only hours ago, the Supreme Court released a judgment that stripped the Prime Minister of legitimacy and branded him unfit to lead. It was more than a legal ruling. It was a political death sentence. For decades, Britain has lived under the assumption that no court would dare topple a sitting Prime Minister. But tonight, that unspoken rule has been shattered. And in its place, a constitutional earthquake has erupted. The judgment itself is a sprawling 124-page document, one that reads less like legal analysis and more like a political obituary. It chronicles in chilling detail the scandals that have haunted Starmer's time in office: undeclared gifts, suspicious property sales, offshore dealings, and a pattern of deception that the court declared incompatible with public service. At the heart of the case was a £124,000 discrepancy tied to the sale of a North London property linked to Starmer's family. What at first appeared to be a minor oversight was revealed under scrutiny as a deliberate attempt to conceal financial gain. Auditors raised red flags, noting the property was sold far below market value, with the structure of the transaction suggesting an intent to avoid disclosure. From there, the investigation only widened. Lavish foreign trips disguised as research, luxury gifts from wealthy donors left undeclared, and offshore accounts connected to shell companies in Jersey and the Cayman Islands all emerged as part of a pattern of misconduct that could no longer be ignored. Chief Justice Dame Sue Carr delivered the verdict with a severity that sent shockwaves through Westminster. Her words left no ambiguity. The Prime Minister had misled Parliament, betrayed public trust, and compromised the integrity of his office. The ruling declared his behaviour not as carelessness, but as corruption, a direct attack on the values of accountability and honesty he once promised to uphold. Legal experts who had spent their lives studying constitutional law were stunned. "This changes everything," one professor commented. "It is a moment Britain has never faced before. The judiciary has directly ended the career of a sitting Prime Minister." Inside number 10, the atmosphere quickly descended into chaos. Advisors and aides, once confident that Starmer could weather political storms, scrambled to craft a defence. Emergency meetings stretched into the night, with lawyers drafting counter-arguments and communications teams preparing possible statements. Yet each draft, each spin, each excuse seemed hollow in the face of the Supreme Court's uncompromising language. For the first time in modern history, the man in Britain's most powerful office found himself legally stripped of authority, and there was nothing he could say that could undo it. Parliament reacted almost instantly. Conservative MPs seized on the judgment, demanding an immediate vote of no confidence. Nigel Farage, leader of Reform UK, stood outside Parliament and called Starmer's position morally bankrupt, urging a snap election. But perhaps more dangerous for the Prime Minister were the cracks forming inside his own party. Labour MPs who had once stood by him began to distance themselves. Shadow ministers whispered of resignation. A cabinet member, speaking anonymously, gave a chilling warning. "If he doesn't step down, he takes all of us down with him." That message echoed through Westminster's corridors, where whispers of succession replaced any hope of survival. The public's reaction was swift and furious. Protests broke out in London, Manchester, Birmingham and Glasgow, with thousands flooding the streets. Placards bearing the words "Resign Now" filled the air. Social media exploded with hashtags like #Starmer out, #Supreme Court verdict and #PM scandal, trending globally within hours. Citizens, long disillusioned with corruption in politics, now had confirmation that their doubts were justified. Editorials across the media spectrum, from The Guardian to The Telegraph, demanded his resignation in unflinching language. Even the BBC, often cautious in its tone, carried the stark headline, "Supreme Court orders Prime Minister to resign." And yet, in the face of this storm, Starmer remained silent. No statement, no apology, no resignation, just an eerie silence from Downing Street. As though the Prime Minister hoped the chaos might burn itself out. But that silence did not ease the crisis, it deepened it. Legal experts made clear that there was no escape. Professor Ella Hartley of Oxford declared, "The court acted within its jurisdiction. The Prime Minister must comply. There is no constitutional loophole, no negotiation, no compromise." Her words underscored what the public already felt, that the rule of law had spoken, and Starmer's refusal to respond was not resilience, it was defiance. Britain now stands at the edge of the unknown. Never before has its highest court removed its highest leader. The balance of power between the judiciary, parliament and the executive has been rewritten in real time. The question is no longer whether Starmer can survive politically, it is whether Britain's institutions can survive the shock of this unprecedented clash. The fall of Keir Starmer has begun, and its aftershocks will define the future of the nation. The ripple effect of the Supreme Court's ruling did not end in Westminster. It spread like wildfire across the entire nation, leaving both the public and Starmer's allies scrambling for answers. Cabinet ministers who had once defended him with unwavering loyalty now found themselves forced into silence. Some attempted to distance themselves, whispering that they never knew the full extent of his actions, while others remained behind closed doors, calculating their next move. What had been a government projecting strength and unity just weeks ago now looked fractured, disjointed and terrified. The Supreme Court's judgment wasn't just a legal decision, it was a political earthquake that shook the very pillars of power. For the opposition parties, it was a moment of vindication. They wasted no time in declaring Starmer unfit to govern, demanding his immediate resignation and calling for fresh elections. In Parliament, the chamber was filled with outrage, disbelief and a sense of history being written in real time. MPs stood, one after another, tearing into the Prime Minister, accusing him of betraying the people's trust. The Speaker struggled to control the fury in the room as the word resign echoed through the chamber with thunderous intensity. Meanwhile, outside of Westminster, the anger of ordinary citizens boiled over. Protesters gathered in major cities, holding banners and shouting chants that shook the streets. Many saw the ruling as proof that the system was finally holding the powerful accountable, but others feared what this meant for the stability of the nation. Was this truly justice, or was the country on the verge of chaos? Starmer's supporters argued that he was the victim of a judicial coup, while his critics claimed it was the inevitable downfall of a man who believed he was untouchable. The media amplified the divisions with headlines screaming words like disgrace, betrayal and downfall. Every news channel carried wall-to-wall coverage, analysing every line of the court's ruling, speculating about the consequences and asking one chilling question: who would rise to replace him? Behind closed doors in Downing Street, Starmer was said to be furious, pacing the halls as his advisers urged him to step down before the crisis grew worse. But Starmer, known for his stubborn streak, refused to accept defeat. He believed he could survive this storm, that his authority was still intact if he could rally enough allies to his side. Yet the reality was far bleaker. Leaked reports suggested that members of his own party were already plotting his replacement, holding secret meetings and discussing the possibility of submitting letters of no confidence. The knives were out and the countdown to his political end had already begun. The nation could feel it. The tension, the uncertainty, the sense that something historic was about to unfold. The Prime Minister of Britain was cornered, the walls closing in around him. And the once unshakable image of Keir Starmer now looked like a man staring at the end of his career. Britain is no longer watching politics as a distant spectator sport. It is living through the storm of its greatest constitutional crisis in modern history. When the Supreme Court struck down Keir Starmer's secret EU plan, the shockwaves did not remain confined to the legal chambers of Westminster. No, my friends, they erupted like thunder across the entire nation. In every town square, in every pub, in every household, one question was being asked: how long can Starmer survive when the very foundations of democracy have turned against him? The ruling was brutal in its clarity. The court declared that Starmer had acted beyond the limits of his office, attempting to bypass both Parliament and the will of the people. The so-called quiet treaty he had been negotiating behind closed doors with EU officials was not only unconstitutional, it was illegal. For millions of voters, this was not just a legal defeat for Starmer, it was the ultimate betrayal. The man who had promised to respect democracy was now branded a schemer who tried to hand Britain back to Brussels without consent, and the backlash was immediate. Crowds poured onto the streets of London, Manchester, Birmingham and Glasgow. The chants grew louder: "Resign, Starmer! Resign now!" Outside Number 10, protesters carried placards comparing him to the very leaders he once condemned for corruption and arrogance. Inside Downing Street, aides described the mood as chaotic, with ministers turning on each other, demanding answers. Some cabinet members whispered that it was time to abandon ship before the entire Labour government went down with him. But Starmer, in his trademark style, refused to admit fault. Standing at the dispatch box in the Commons, his voice cracked as he insisted that the court had misinterpreted his actions. He spoke of a vision for stability and rebuilding Britain's place in Europe, but no one was listening anymore. The opposition benches roared with fury, Conservative MPs waving the ruling in the air like a death warrant. Nigel Farage seized the moment, thundering that Starmer had committed the greatest act of political fraud since the days of Cromwell. Even moderate MPs who once backed Starmer sat in silence, their heads lowered, unwilling to defend the indefensible. Meanwhile, the nation's institutions began to wobble. Senior civil servants leaked memos showing that Starmer's inner circle had deliberately hidden the extent of the negotiations from Parliament. The documents exposed weeks of secret meetings, coded messages and agreements signed without proper oversight. The headlines the next morning were devastating. Starmer's secret pact with Brussels exposed, democracy undermined at the highest level, and Britain betrayed. But it wasn't just the press turning against him, it was the people. Farmers who had already been furious at new tax regulations now saw proof that Starmer had plotted to reopen trade doors that would crush their industry under EU imports. Fishermen who had celebrated Brexit as their victory felt robbed once again. Families struggling under record inflation and tax hikes wondered why their Prime Minister had time to draft secret treaties, but no plan to lower their bills. The anger was not political anymore, it was personal. And then came the ultimate humiliation: resignations. Within hours of the ruling, senior Labour MPs began abandoning the government in waves. Shadow ministers, party whips and even long-time allies of Starmer resigned live on television, each accusing him of deception and arrogance. The corridors of Westminster resembled a crumbling fortress with allies fleeing as the walls fell in. One MP described it bluntly: "Well, this is the end. The government cannot function. Starmer is finished." Yet Starmer clung on. In a defiant late-night address, he looked directly into the cameras, his voice trembling as he insisted he would not resign. He claimed the court had overreached, that political enemies were using the ruling to destabilise Britain, and that his duty was to remain in office for stability. But instead of calming the storm, his speech ignited fury. Social media exploded with hashtags like #StarmerOut and "a betrayal of Britain," trending globally within minutes. Millions of ordinary citizens felt insulted, as if their outrage had been dismissed with a shrug. The crisis deepened further when whispers emerged of the Crown's concern. Palace insiders hinted that King Charles had been briefed about the scale of the unrest and the possibility of Parliament dissolving under the pressure. Royal intervention in politics is rare, but in moments of national breakdown, it has happened before. The thought of the monarch stepping in to restore order only amplified the sense of impending collapse. Was Britain heading for a moment where the king himself would have to act? And then came the moment no one could have imagined. Protesters stormed the gates outside Parliament, their anger boiling over after yet another defiant Starmer press conference. Police clashed with demonstrators, the streets echoing with shouts, sirens and chaos. Images flooded the news, Union Jacks waving, banners reading, "Give us back our democracy," and ordinary citizens dragged away in handcuffs. Britain, once known for quiet resilience, looked like a nation on the brink of revolution. In that chaos, one thing became clear. This was no longer about Brexit, Europe, or treaties. This was about trust. A prime minister who had risen to power promising honesty and fairness now stood accused of treachery at the highest level. And as the walls of his government collapsed around him, the question remained, would Starmer fall on his own sword, or would the people tear it from his hand? But friends, the real storm begins now. If you thought the scandal was already big, then brace yourselves, because the aftershocks of this Supreme Court ruling are far more dangerous than anyone expected. The corridors of Westminster are no longer echoing with confident voices of power. They are trembling with whispers of betrayal, panic and revenge. Keir Starmer's secret EU dealings were meant to be hidden forever, locked away behind closed doors where the public could never see. But now, with the court exposing every detail, the entire nation is left asking one terrifying question. Was this simply a plan for trade and diplomacy, or was it something much darker, something that could destroy Britain's independence forever? Already, MPs are turning on each other. Senior Labour figures who once stood shoulder to shoulder with Starmer are now rushing to distance themselves. Leaked reports claim that private meetings are being exposed, where promises were made not just to Brussels, but to foreign investors who had been promised influence in Britain's energy, healthcare and transport sectors. If true, this means Starmer wasn't just negotiating policy. He was selling slices of Britain's sovereignty piece by piece, all while the public was kept in the dark. And now, those documents are being torn apart by journalists, lawyers and rival politicians, each revelation more shocking than the last. The Supreme Court's ruling has done more than just destroy Starmer's carefully woven narrative. It has lit a fire under the entire political establishment. Protesters are already gathering outside Downing Street, demanding immediate answers. Chants of traitor and sellout echo through the streets of London, while pro-EU activists argue back, creating a scene of chaos, division and rage. Britain is no longer just debating policy, it is on the verge of tearing itself apart over the question of whether its leaders have been loyal to their own people. And then comes the most dramatic twist of all. Whispers from inside Buckingham Palace suggest that the King himself has been briefed on the crisis. Constitutional experts say this could spiral into a full-scale showdown between the Crown and Parliament, something Britain hasn't seen in centuries. If the government collapses and Labour is shattered, the King may be forced to step in to dissolve Parliament, to call an emergency election, or perhaps to take action so extraordinary that it would rewrite the very rules of British democracy. The thought alone has sent shivers down the spine of the political elite, because such a move would signal that Starmer's betrayal didn't just break trust, it broke the system itself. But the story doesn't end here. The ruling has sparked fury across Europe as well. EU officials who had quietly believed Starmer's promises are said to be deeply embarrassed and even furious at the betrayal. If Brussels turns against him, then not only has Starmer lost Britain, he has also lost his supposed allies abroad. This leaves him stranded, surrounded by enemies at home and abandoned by partners overseas. A prime minister with no power, no plan, and no way out. Meanwhile, ordinary British citizens are left to face the consequences. Energy prices, food imports and key trade negotiations are now in total limbo. Families already struggling with the cost of living crisis fear that this scandal will plunge them into even deeper uncertainty. Small businesses who rely on EU trade deals are panicking, while farmers and manufacturers warn that they cannot survive if Britain is forced into yet another political war with Europe. The anger is not just about Starmer's lies, it is about the very real pain that those lies could now inflict on every household in the country. In the House of Commons, chaos reigns. Tory leaders smell blood in the water, preparing for the kill. Some are calling for Starmer's immediate resignation, while others are already positioning themselves for a snap election that could completely reshape the future of Britain. Labour, once united, is fracturing at lightning speed, with resignations piling up and rebels threatening to form breakaway groups. The dream of a strong, stable government has turned into a nightmare of collapsing authority and shattered promises. And yet the most chilling part is this. Starmer himself remains silent. Reports suggest he has retreated behind closed doors with only his most loyal advisors, refusing to face the press, the people, or even his own MPs. His silence speaks louder than any words. It suggests a man cornered. A man who knows that every move he makes from now on could be his last. The once confident leader who promised to restore Britain's future is now a figure of suspicion, his legacy already poisoned, his career hanging by a thread. Friends, we stand at the edge of history. This isn't just a scandal, it isn't just politics. This is the moment Britain must decide who it really belongs to, the people or the politicians who believe they could rule in secret. The Supreme Court has destroyed Starmer's EU plot, but the real battle is only just beginning. And as the nation erupts, one truth is becoming impossible to deny. Nothing will ever be the same again. The collapse of Keir Starmer's Labour government has not just triggered a political crisis, but it has sent shockwaves through every corner of British society. This is no longer just about one man, one scandal, or even one party. This is about the future of democracy in Britain, the future of trust between the people and their leaders, and the very survival of the parliamentary system as we know it. Tonight, the nation stands at a crossroads, and millions are asking the same burning question. Where do we go from here? In the aftermath of the Supreme Court's historic ruling and the avalanche of resignations from Labour MPs, the chaos in Westminster has spread like wildfire. Parliament itself is paralysed. The opposition benches are fractured, Labour is leaderless, and even the Conservative Party, once thought to be waiting patiently for its return to power, has been thrown into turmoil. Why? Because this crisis has exposed more than corruption at the heart of Labour. It has exposed how weak, broken and divided the political class has become. Ordinary people are watching in disbelief. They are seeing how the political elite have lived in luxury, grown fat off taxpayer money, and then, when exposed, scrambled to cover up their tracks. The 22 billion scandal was the final straw. People feel betrayed, cheated and silenced. That's why the streets have become the true battleground of this crisis. From London to Manchester, from Birmingham to Glasgow, people are pouring out in protest. Some are demanding immediate elections. Others are demanding that Starmer and his allies face prison. The anger is boiling over and the government's collapse has only poured fuel on the fire. But perhaps the most dangerous part of this moment is the vacuum of power it has created. With Labour in ruins and the Tories in disarray, who now speaks for the people? Reform UK is surging in the polls. Nigel Farage is calling this the greatest opportunity for political change in modern British history, and even independent MPs are rallying behind the idea of a People's Parliament. For the first time in decades, Britain faces the possibility of its two-party system being shattered forever, and that terrifies the establishment. Behind closed doors, frantic meetings are taking place. Civil servants are whispering about the possibility of Parliament being dissolved altogether. Some are even speculating that King Charles may be forced to step in as a last resort, using his constitutional powers to stabilise the country. Imagine that, a monarch stepping back into the political arena in the 21st century because politicians have failed so completely. It sounds unthinkable. But this crisis has already taken Britain into uncharted waters. Meanwhile, Starmer's silence is deafening. Once hailed as the man who would restore trust after the chaos of Brexit and Boris Johnson's scandals, he has now become the very symbol of betrayal. His enemies call him the man who sold Britain out, accusing him of secret EU deals, hidden donations and backroom pacts that undermined the will of the people. His supporters, they've all but vanished. Former allies are distancing themselves. Labour MPs are resigning en masse. And even his most loyal advisors are said to be preparing for the end. Starmer, once so sure of his control, is now isolated and abandoned. This is why Section 5 of our story is not just about politics, it is about the fight for Britain's soul. The Supreme Court ruling has revealed the corruption. The resignations have revealed the cowardice. And now the people are revealing their fury. But what comes next? That is the question hanging over every protest, every newspaper headline, every late night broadcast. Will Britain rise from this chaos stronger, with a new system that truly represents its people? Or will the collapse of Labour mark the beginning of a darker chapter, one where instability and division tear the nation apart? The truth is this: history is being written right now, in real time. What we are seeing is the crumbling of an old order. The two-party system, the comfort of business-as-usual politics, the illusion that Westminster is untouchable, all of it is falling. Britain is entering a new age, but whether it will be an age of hope or an age of despair depends on what happens in the coming days. One thing is certain: Keir Starmer's downfall has changed everything. The people will not forget, they will not forgive, and they will not go back to silence. The collapse of Labour is not the end of the story. It is only the beginning of a revolution that will decide the fate of Britain itself.